Hi, everybody. This is Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, and you're listening to Brad Gilmore.
Doc! Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Martin.
Oh, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Whoa, this is heavy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time's greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. My name is Brad Gilmore, and we are back with season 10 of the show. I can't believe this thing's been going for 8 years, but you know what? We're still doing it, and there's no reason to stop. Now, we have a great season lined up for you. We're going to talk about today about Anatomy of a Scene, but we have questions coming up. We have time capsules coming up. We have interviews coming up. I'm going to try to make season 10 one of, if not the best season in the history of the podcast, which I will say, these last like 3 seasons, I think from like 2019 through now, they've been really solid. And I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but I'm just saying, like, they've been great because I've gotten to have so many guests on. Like, let's just break this down. I'm going to go back. When was it? Season 7, maybe? That really kicked it off for me? Season 6? Season 6. I mean, season 6, you had Crispin Glover. You had my book come out, which was cool for me. We had Leah Thompson on. We had Don Fullilove on. And then season 7 starts, and boom, we have Christopher Lloyd, Bob Gale, Peter Rosenberg, Daniel J. Glenn, Mikey Day, Darlene Vogel, Jennifer Trottier, Chris Van Vliet, Chris Jericho, Eric Tate, Jeremiah Chachik, Joe Walser, Bob Gale again, and Christopher Lloyd again. That was crazy. I didn't plan it that way. That was insane. Then last season, you had James Tolkien, Michael Waldron, Rob Mellon, George Lazenby was on this podcast. I know it was a little random, but he was on here. Ken Knapsack, Tom Silknitter. We had Fourth Theory Not Too Good to Be True. And then season 9, we had Steve Franks on for 2 episodes, Allison Robicelli, my folks. We had Tony, Angela, and Daz from the Back to the Future, the musical fans. We had William Ramsey, Jeff Smith, Burton Gillum, Francis Lee McCain, Jimmy Fallon, what? Cassine Gaines and Laker Jim's Fletchcast guys. And, of course, Jay Leno talking about the DeLorean. What is going on? And then now we have season 10 of the show, which I'm really excited about. I got some cool upcoming guests that I've already taped those interviews, some fun episodes that we're going to look at. I'm going to try to do as many as I possibly can. I'd love to do another 15 to 20 episodes this season of the show. I also have a lot going outside of this. I just want to plug real quick. You can always check out The Collection with Brad Gilmore. That's where I have a lot of great interviews. Recently, I've had William Shatner and Bryan Cranston and others. It's a really fun show that I get to do, and I really have a great time talking to these great people. And as always, the Hall of Fame with Booker T and myself. If you like pro wrestling, you'll like that show. And Clue the Movie Podcast with Jeff Smith, where we watch the 1985 cult classic movie Clue 1 minute at a time. And I have a little board in my studio where I'm looking at upcoming projects, and I got a lot that I'm working on. One of which probably going to be out next year. I'm really excited about. So hopefully y'all check those out. And I got some acting stuff that's come up recently, and I just want to give this a plug. My guy Chill from IO Visuals directed a movie called Memory Builds the Monument, which is about an historic music venue in Houston, Texas, obviously where I'm native to. It was important after segregation and in the historic Fifth Ward area. That's on BET Plus. I have a role in that documentary where I'm reenacting a scene. I'm acting, guys. I got a couple acting credits to my name. So you can go check that out on BET Plus. You got to support that. That means such a fun project to be involved with. Actually, I had landed from Fort Lauderdale in Houston. I filmed that scene at like 1:30 in the morning. We did it in a couple takes, and it had to be turned in the next day. Crazy stuff. But I want you to go support that. Memory Builds the Monument on BET Plus. Go do it. Go do it for me because I do it for you. But today on the show, we're going to be breaking down the anatomy of the opening 5 minutes of Back to the Future. What makes Back to the Future such a great script? We're going to listen to a little video essay about that. We're going to break down elements to make a good scene. Then we're going to watch the movie together and figure out all the things that it told us in that 5-minute block of time here on Back to the Future, the podcast. All right, guys, so when we talk about Back to the Future, you've heard me say it on this show before, and it still stays true to this day. It is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, screenplay of all time. Now, obviously, I'm biased. Obviously, I love this movie more than most people in the world. I mean, all of us who are here, you know, listening to this podcast love this film. And so I think that we would all agree with that statement about ourselves. We love Back to the Future more than anybody. And we as the pinheads oftentimes, maybe, perhaps, can get, I don't know, how would you say? Sorry, I'm playing with my settings here. There we go. We can get kind of, all right, here we go. All right, everybody. So when we talk about Back to the Future, there's a lot of things that we have to discuss, and one of them is the script. You probably, as I, have heard all the behind-the-scenes commentaries and read the books, maybe that I've even written, or that Cassine Gaines has written, or Michael, who does the visual histories, has written. And we know a lot about how the movie came to be. We know about the backstory of the film, the germ of the idea. But people who are not even diehard Back to the Future fans, like anybody listening to this show or myself are, they would admit, and I don't even know if it's an admittance, they would agree that Back to the Future is perhaps the best written script, or at least one of the best written scripts of all time. Now that goes to Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis for doing that. But you have to ask yourself, okay, what makes it so good? And there was an article that I came across, and this is for our Anatomy of a Scene today, for our 5 Minutes of Future, where we kind of look at this opening scene that I want to break down with you and show why it's so great. But this was a article from filmschoolrejects.com. I watch them sometimes and read some of their stuff. The name of the article is Why Back to the Future is One of the Greatest Scripts Ever. So I'm going to read from this real quick, and then we're going to break down something else before we get into the scene today, which is going to be the opening, or the first 5 minutes, really, of Back to the Future. So this says, and this is written by H. Perry Horton on November 1st, 2016. He said, when people talk about great screenplays, inevitably, the conversation turns to films like Casablanca, The Godfather, and Chinatown. Those are, after all, the scripts ranked by the Writers Guild of America as the best 3 in all of movie history, and of course, they are all undisputably brilliant in their own way. But there's another brilliant script that doesn't get as much mention, though it did end up as number 56 on the same WGA list. I got to read this list. Number 56? There's 56 screenplays, or 55 screenplays ahead of Back to the Future? I doubt that. Okay, though it ended up on number 56 on the same WGA list, perhaps because of the audience it's intended for, the under 18 crowd. I'm talking about Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale's script for the original Back to the Future. Not only does Back to the Future balance its narrative across 3 timelines, the original 1985, 1955, and an altered 1985, it does so while developing multiple iterations of more than a half a dozen characters. Marty, the McFly family, Biff, Doc Brown, Mr. Strickland, and blending elements of action, adventure, comedy, and technology-driven sci-fi that's made it all palatable for a young audience. That's the plotting equivalent of juggling chainsaws that have been set on fire while standing on a tightrope over a sarlacc pit. You really got to know what you're doing. But here's the kicker. Zemeckis and Gale did know what they were doing, so much so they made a complicated process appear seamlessly fluid, at the same time making one of the most iconic, beloved, and enduring films of its decade, I'd argue of all time. It is no stretch of the imagination to call Back to the Future a near-perfect screenplay. Nothing is absolutely perfect. That's their words, not mine. And more importantly, it is very accessible It is a very accessible script for burgeoning screenwriters to pore over and learn from, especially in regards to its structure and how the plot is deployed across it. Now, I'm going to interject here for a second. Of course, people use Back to the Future, the screenplay, to write their own screenplays. It's taught in film school. I've talked to many people who've taken film classes and screenwriting classes. They bring up Back to the Future probably before they bring up Casablanca, because Back to the Future does something that's so rare in any movie ever, but especially movies nowadays, is it sets things up to be paid off later, and it pays them all off. Very hard to do. There's not really wasted dialogue in Back to the Future at all, and you can say that is true of very few movies. Okay. In the following video, Jack's movie reviews, the storytelling of Back to the Future is put under the microscope to analyze what makes it so effective, from its time management skills to its patterns of introducing, then reintroducing, and in some cases, reintroducing characters, and its tempered exposition that lingers just long enough in each its many genres to convince the audience the film belongs there, but not long enough to mire them in cliched trappings. Too often, the Back to the Future trilogy is dismissed as mere popcorn escapism. I don't know who does that, but in reality, it's one of the smartest franchises in the last half century and deserves to be regarded with a more analytical eye. This is the perfect video for study. Okay, you know what? Let's see how long is this video? Why don't we watch this? So this says Back to the Future, a lesson in storytelling.
One of the hardest parts about storytelling is establishing the world. To create the rules, set up the narrative, establish who our protagonists are, teach us who our antagonists are, create the central conflict, but most importantly, do this in a way that is refreshing and keeps us interested and entertained. The more complex the narrative is, the harder that is. So imagine having to set up a narrative that exists in 2 different time periods, follows dozens of different characters, most of which exist in both of these different time periods, all the while maintaining a light and comedic tone, keeping the scientific aspect at a level that people of all ages can understand and appreciate. I don't think that anyone is going to say that is easy, but not only were Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale able to succeed in doing this, but they did it perfectly. I want to pull up the timeline of this movie because I want to shed some light on how well the story was told. We need to first explore its structure. This is a film with 3 very distinct and very separate acts. Each of these achieves something different. The first exists only in 1985 when we were first introduced to our world. We meet our characters and learn about time travel. The first act ends when Marty gets into the DeLorean and goes back into 1955, right as the car crashes into the barn. From here, we are reintroduced to the world as Marty explores his hometown when it was 30 years younger, meets his parents when they were in high school, and does everything he can to try and get his parents together. This act ends when he returns to 1985, tries to save Doc, tie up loose ends that were created in the first act. Now this all blends together perfectly to form a movie that never really seems too slow and never loses its pacing or its tone. Each of these 3 acts has a very specific purpose. Act 1 is for setup, Act 2 is for revelation, and Act 3 is for resolution. Let's start off at the beginning and look at Act 1. Now the very opening title sequence provides about as much information as we need to know about the characters. Doc is an inventor. As of late, he hasn't had much success, but he is working on something big, something with plutonium. Marty, on the other hand, is young, reckless, has an interest in skateboarding, playing music, and obviously looks up to Doc and is good friends with him. In addition, time is very present in this scene, is going to play a big part in the rest of the movie. However, this works in 2 ways. First, it really lets people who have never seen the movie get introduced to these characters. But in addition, it also allows people who are rewatching it to notice things that we may not have known for the first time. We see the man hanging on the clock tower. Now, this is a very clear reference to Harold Lloyd and Safety Last, but also a reference to what we see later in the film. However, the setup continues well beyond this scene, as we are later introduced to our love interest, our antagonist, his family history.
You remind me of your father when he went here. He was a slacker too.
The main message of the movie, which is
History is gonna change.
we are told about the important events that are going to play out later in the film.
Leave the clock tower!
We meet other real antagonists and the rest of this family. And most importantly, this all happens and flows together smoothly. After this, we meet Doc and we immediately see the DeLorean time travel. This is something that is very important in that there is never a dull moment. Every single scene in this movie adds up to something. We don't wait around to get to the moment we've been waiting for. Instead, we just get to that moment and set up for another one. Everything that we see in the first act ultimately is able to set up something that is going to happen later in the movie. Once we see the DeLorean time travel for the first time, a little over 5 minutes later we're seeing it again, only this time Marty is going to 1955 on accident. This is one of the most important parts of the movie. He didn't want to be in this situation but was instead forced upon it. As we already learned, his character is by all means a slacker, yet he has to pick up the responsibility that is forced onto him or else he will cease to exist. But before we look into this, I want to talk about the second act. The second act is undeniably the most important part of the movie. It's where the climax is, and it's where most of the content is focused around. It's where most of the jokes are, and is the most enjoyable part of it. But the reason that this act works so well is because of things that were set up earlier in Act 1. What I mean by setup is very similar to a joke, in that we get a setup and a punchline. For example, when Marty first arrives in 1955, he crash lands in the middle of the farmlands. However, at this point, we as the audience already know that this used to be farmlands. Why? Because Doc told us earlier.
I remember when this was all farmland as far as the eye could see.
We get the
Are you
setup
telling me that you built a time machine
and the punchline.
out of a DeLorean?
However, in doing this, we get another setup, in that his car looks like a spaceship and his outfit makes him look like an astronaut. So when the family comes out to investigate, they think he's an alien. Every single moment in this movie has already been set up for us. Some of these are used for a comedic effect, like here is our setup,
Like the way I met your father.
and here is our punchline.
That was so stupid. Grandpa hit him with the car.
But others are used to move the story along. Small, useless interactions that happened earlier in the film seem to be throwaway lines. For example, earlier in the movie, we see Jennifer and Marty about to kiss. This is our setup. And the punchline is someone stops this by rattling a jar of coins in their face and asking for donations to save the clock tower. This seems to be a one-off moment. However, later in this movie, this ends up being able to get him back to 1985. So things are set up both in the 1955 part, but also the 1985 part. However, it never feels old. It never feels like the movie is rehashing itself, but instead it provides a sense of nostalgia. And it makes sense. We are seeing a world that we have already heard about, but most younger audiences have obviously never experienced because they weren't born in 1955. Once we get to the city, we are treated to happy, upbeat music and the feeling that we are in a simpler time. And I think that this is the heart of the film. I think we get a love letter to the 1950s. The film's two writers, Zemeckis and Gale, were both born in the early 50s. And part of what this movie tried and succeeded in doing was showing off their idea of the 1950s, showing it off through a child's perspective, someone who is fresh into this world but still needs to experience it. This sense of nostalgia exists not only a way to tell the story, but also as a personal note to the 1950s. However, there's also more than that. When Marty first enters this world, it appears to be perfect, a fun time where everyone is happy and nothing bad happens, but as we soon learn, that isn't even remotely true. We see the contrast between the 50s and the 80s and see that they are both very similar. The problems that exist in 1985 are the same problems that existed in 1955. I think that this shows that no matter what technology is invented in the future, people are always going to be people. The only way around this is to make the most of your situation, not try to change it to make it better. I want to end this video by looking at the conclusion because it is very different from the first and second acts. Whereas the first act sets up the second act, the third act is used to tie everything together. Problems that were created in the first act are suddenly resolved. I think this really has to do with the pacing. Over the past hour while Marty was in 1955, he had been solving all the problems that were created in the first act. Now, we think that Marty is only going to get back to the future, and that's all that he's going to be able to do. But as we soon learn, he also resolves the problems that were created in the first act, like his family's social status. Marty is fixing both his problems in his life, but also his parents. I think that above all else, Back to the Future shows the importance of a great screenplay. This movie could have easily turned out to have been another forgotten science fiction film from the 1980s. Instead, it was so much more than that. It created lovable characters, gave us a fun story, made us laugh, and all around showed off great filmmaking. This is a movie that followed the rules. Characters were developed, conflicts were introduced, locations were developed, and the audience was taken into the world in the first act. This movie took influence from other movies that have worked in the past and made something great of it. This is a fun movie that flows together and works perfectly. I am by no means the first person to bring this up. There are entire courses taught about this movie and storytelling, but I think that it's important for everyone to watch this movie to learn the fundamentals of good storytelling and good filmmaking. Thank you very much for watching. It's been a little while since I watched this movie and it was so much fun revisiting it. As I said, there's so much you can learn from this movie and I highly recommend watching it if you haven't seen it, or revisit it if you haven't seen it in a little while. Next month, we're going to be looking at.
All right, cool. Well, hey, you know what? I did not plan on watching that all with you, but I'm glad that I did because I learned a few things from him, and so I want to give him another shout out. This is what was his name? Jack's Movie Reviews. You can go check that out on filmschoolrejects.com. But that really helps set up what we're going to do today. So today I kind of want to do what they call anatomy of a scene, but it really just looks at the movie and looks at a particular scene for the movie. In this particular instance, a certain time stamp, which is the first 5 minutes of the movie. Once we see something past, Steven Spielberg presents a Robert Zemeckis film. It is opening credit stuff, but then it starts to go ahead and get into the actual meat of the story. And what's great about this is a lot of the times dialogue sets up the exposition, and that is true here in these first 5 minutes. However, there is a lot going on in the background of the first 5 minutes of Back to the Future that really tells the story, and we see it in passing glances, and when you see rewatches of this movie, of course, it's on your radar, but not as much when you get to break it down. And one of the things I've been doing, and y'all are going to hear one of the episodes this season on Back to the Future, the podcast, where there's another 1985 cult classic film. We talked about it last season on the show, season 9, Clue. And my friend, Jeff Smith, now my friend who I met for the first time on this podcast, we started a whole Clue, the movie podcast. So I definitely go check that out if you like Clue, the movie, as much as I do. As you can tell, there's 3 films from 85 that I love: Clue, the movie, Back to the Future, and Fletch. And in the Clue, the movie podcast, we don't do it like this show is. We actually, Jeff and I, watch the movie Clue 1 minute at a time. And in those minutes, so every episode we talk about 1 minute of the movie. So there'll be 97 episodes. It's a finite amount. And in that podcast, it's really given us the ability to sit down and really break down what the story is and what possibilities can be and things that we've never noticed before. There was like this huge discovery that we made about Clue, the movie, that we actually had to reach out to the director, Jonathan Lynn, about, and he confirmed it. And I've never seen it anywhere. So there's a little tease of why you should go check out Clue, the movie podcast. But having done that show, it allows me now to look at certain things from Back to the Future and appreciate the minutes of them more. That's why instead of doing 1 minute, I wanted to do the first 5 minutes of the movie so that we can break down the scene. Now, here is a little worksheet that people do in college classes when you have film school and screenwriting, and it talks about the elements of a good scene. And this is what the worksheet says. It says good scenes need to avoid pitfalls. Information dump or backstory scenes falter not only because of bad structure, but also because they fail to be relevant to the overall story. Every scene needs to have multiple reasons to exist, and some reasons are more important than others. This checklist summarizes the elements a scene should contain and breaks them down into categories of essential, important, and bonus. Altogether, every scene should have at least 3 of the following reasons to exist. And then it breaks them down. So here's scenes should reveal at least one of these elements, essential elements: a plot point, a character goal, action to advance the plot, and action to increase the tension. All right. The next part says scenes should also reveal at least 2 of these important elements: character development, how stakes are raised, a cause of character conflict, a reinforcement of the stakes, character motivation, an effect of the character conflict. And then lastly, it says scenes should also reveal these bonus elements: character backstory, story theme, foreshadowing, the story's tone or mood, world building, and character backstory, I think I already said. So I want to watch the first 5 minutes of Back to the Future, and we're going to see how much is here. And also, I'm going to stop and pause the movie at certain moments so we can focus on those a little bit more in depth. So let me pull up the scene. So this is actually straight off of YouTube. It is from Universal Pictures All Access. The name of the video is Back to the Future, opening scene in 4K Ultra HD. Marty McFly is just too darn loud is what they've called the video. So if you want to find it on YouTube to watch it with me, it's a 10-minute and 10-second video. We're going to watch the first 5 minutes. And The first thing we do before we even click play, at the 0 minutes and 0 seconds mark, you see a clock, see several clocks, 3 to be exact, one of which draws your focus, and it is the Axis clock that is black and white. It is at, what is that, about 7:54 is the time. Or is that 8:54? And we see Harold Lloyd hanging from it. Now, of course, we just heard about this in the video. I'm playing it right now. Now I got now at 2 seconds in the movie. You can see Harold Lloyd plain as day. And Harold Lloyd, again, if y'all don't know, I know we've probably talked about him before on the show, but when you talk about the silent film era, he's one of the most influential comedians during that time. He actually made nearly 200 movies, both silent and some talkies between 1914 and 1947. He was a resourceful, ambitious go-getter who matched the zeitgeist of the 1920s era of the United States. There's some weird pictures of him with like a pork pie hat on and glasses and a lot of makeup. Obviously, I mean, these were early days of cinema. His films frequently contain thrill sequences of extended chase scenes and daredevil physical feats. Lloyd, hanging from the hands of a clock high above the street, dangerous but risk exaggerated by camera angles and safety last, is considered one of the most enduring images in the history of cinema. Lloyd performed lesser stunts himself, despite having injured himself in August 1919 while doing publicity pictures for the Roach Studio. An accident with a bomb mistaken as a prop resulted in the loss of a thumb and index finger of his right hand. The injury was disguised in future films with the use of a special prosthetic glove and was almost undetectable on the screen. So there's a little backstory about Harold Lloyd, but here's what I wanted to bring this up for, is when I'm looking at those 3 elements that we need, the essential, important, and bonus, we already have foreshadowing in the bonus elements. Already have it. 2 seconds into the movie of seeing the images on the screen, boom, foreshadowing. Now, this is 2 seconds into this video, which is, almost right at the beginning of the movie, very close to the very beginning of the movie. So 2 seconds into this video, we're already getting exposition, really foreshadowing of what's going to happen later on in the movie. And of course, when Doc is hanging from the clock. I'll turn this up a little bit so y'all can hear it. So obviously we know the movie's telling us something about time. Okay, and then boom, here we go. Hill Valley Telegraph. I can't speak today. Hill Valley Telegraph. Brown Mansion destroyed. And I'm sure there's some more high quality images of this where we can read the actual paper. But it says Brown Estate sold to developers, bankrupt inventor. Man, I really cannot talk today. Brown Estate sold to developers. Bankrupt inventor sells off 435 prime acres. This is from, let's see, it says just Friday, Feb. And then it looks like Thursday, August the 2nd, 1962 is the Hill Valley Telegraph where it says Brown Mansion destroyed. And you see a picture of what looks to be like a firefighter or 2 firefighters. And it says Mike Meadows is the one who took the photograph of the Brown Mansion burned down to the ground. Now, why is it burned down? There's all kinds of stuff that we could talk about. Let's see. I want to see in Google reason. Doc Brown Mansion burned. Is there an official reason? He was not allowed to go on Back to the Future 1955. No. Okay. In 1955, in the opening scene article shows that the mansion burned down years before, either for insurance money or due to an explosive experiment. What do you think it was? So here's the article on Doc Brown's mansion. Let's see. This is according to the Back to the Future wiki. The mansion was probably in the possession of the Von Brauns. This is a lot of assumptions, who came to America from Germany. Doc lived there alone, using his fortune funding his scientific experiments. However, he also made use of the garage, which was situated on the property. The mansion was opulently stuffed with medieval suits of armor, an oriental statuette, a pipe organ, and of course, Doc's inventions. On November 5th, 1955, Marty McFly found this address, saw his old friend when he was 30 years younger, although he looked no different, really. See, a week later, we know this. The Brown Mansion burned down on October 1st, 1962, and was sold to developers as seen in the newspaper hanging on one of Doc's walls. After that, Doc stayed in the garage, which, being a separate building, survived the fire. The setback did not seem to worry him as he continued his isolated life. In the timeline in which Emmett married Edna Strickland, which is, I think, from the game, he never discovered the secret of time travel, meaning that the mansion did not burn down in 1962, and by 1986B, it was used as a base for the Brown Institute of Social Sciences, of course. Of course, yeah, this is the Gamble House. So, yeah, insurance money, or one of his inventions, is the presumed reason. But this is telling us, again, character backstory. So we've already had foreshadowing, right? And now we're getting more into that bonus elements of a character backstory. We're learning about Doc Brown before we even know who he is. And we pan out and we see, boom, Benjamin Franklin. And I think that's Isaac Newton. No one hurt me if that's not. Who is that? Is that Isaac Newton? No. Who is that? Who is that in the shot? Thomas Edison. I'm sorry. That's who I meant. Thomas Edison, not Isaac Newton. I knew that. So again, we're learning that Doc, and then there's, looks like Einstein, Albert Einstein, right to the right of Benjamin Franklin. So we're learning about who this guy is. Not only did he at one point have this mansion that burned to the ground, but we're seeing photographs of these three historical figures. You have to assume that he admires all three of them. All three known for what? Inventions. Of course, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Edison next to each other makes a lot of sense. Benjamin Franklin, according to the story, invented electricity or discovered it. And Thomas Edison, the light bulb. And of course, we know theories of relativity and everything that Einstein helped bring to life. Now, also, boom, we're here seeing on, right now the screen says casting by Mike Fenton, Jane Feinberg, and Judy Taylor, CSA. But you see a Burger King cup. We know that Doc lives next to Burger King. You see another clock. He was eating a Whopper, it looks like. And you see that JVC video camera. Looks like he's not well kept. Just
October
leaving
is
trash.
inventory time. So right now, Statler Toyota is making the best deals of the year on all 1985 model Toyotas.
Statler Toyota, we're already hearing about it from the radio. Statler Toyota, of course, is Marty McFly, is the truck that he wants.
You won't find a better
Where they
car
sell
at
it.
a better price with better service anywhere in Hill Valley.
Now, what is this telling us right here with the General Electric coffee pot? Now, I know I'm really breaking this down by the second, not even by the first 5 minutes, but I'm just explaining what this is telling us. So with this coffee pot, we know that, boom, it's hitting the bottom of the base that heats up. It's supposed to heat up the coffee pot. I know there are people who were born in the last 15 years, maybe 20 years. We have actually a young audience who listens to this show, and they've probably never seen a coffee pot like this. They're used to an espresso or a Keurig. We used to have this warmer at the bottom of the coffee pot that would boil an actual pot that was glass for your coffee. The pot itself isn't there. And what is it? What could that possibly tell us? Well, that tells us that he's not there, right? Where is he? We don't know.
That's Statler Toyota in downtown Hill Valley. But hurry, these prices are only good to the end of the month.
The Senate is expected to vote on this today. In other news, officials at the Pacific Nuclear Research Facility have denied the rumor that a case of missing plutonium was in fact stolen from their vault 2 weeks ago. A Libyan terrorist group had claimed responsibility for the alleged theft. However, officials now attribute the discrepancy to a simple clerical error.
Okay, boom. I mean, that was just beautiful. That is exposition. And exposition is like the it's like the introduction to the story. It includes anything that we really need to know that's going to describe that primary plot or problem that drives the plot of the story. And this more so is helping with the mood, the time, the setting, an introduction to the story more than anything, exposition, information we need to know in order to understand what's going on in the world. And right now, that news reporter called attention to the missing plutonium, that they're saying they're denying that was ever missing. The Libyan terrorist group took responsibility for it, but it was chalked up to a clerical error. What's funny about that, too, is it's almost a commentary on news and information and how a lot of times it's misspread, kind of applicable nowadays, right? With all the fragmented news system that we live in.
The FBI.
And then boom, we see the burned toast again. We know he hasn't been here in a while.
Filled with cocaine washed ashore near Boca Raton, Florida yesterday.
Wait, what did she say?
Filled with cocaine washed ashore near Boca Raton, Florida yesterday.
Several wooden crates of cocaine washed ashore in Boca Raton yesterday. Who had the cocaine? Maybe Doc. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why Doc's missing. Doc's missing. We don't know where he is. Maybe it had to do with the cocaine on Boca Raton. And again, we're seeing these a lot of automation, right? The switch that turns on his coffee pot and the timer that flips the switch for the television set. The radio comes on at a certain time. Now we're seeing this kind of Rube Goldberg experiment almost that's going on with the cow can dog food. It's got the automated robot arm that turns it all off. Opens up the can and dumps it upside down. And Doc forgot to turn all of this off. But we're seeing that he's an inventor. This is helping with character development. And every scene needs character development. And that's one of the two important elements that we've already seen. A cause of character conflict we've also gotten, I think, with the mansion being burned. We see kind of a little bit more about whom he may be. This person who we still don't know yet. Einstein, we see that he's a dog owner. Again, the bowl's overfilled. We don't know why, but obviously the owner hasn't been here in a while. And also no cuts
Hey,
there.
Doc?
And there's Marty saying Doc. God,
Hello,
this
anybody
first,
home?
this first
Hi, Doc,
scene's
come
so
here, boy.
great. Now also,
What's going on?
it says in every scene, it should reveal at least one of the essential elements. Action to advance the plot? Well, maybe not so much yet. Action to increase tension? Not so much yet. A character's goal? Not so much yet. But a plot point? Yes. We've gotten a plot point. There is stolen plutonium. That has to be significant or they wouldn't show it to us. Why would they tell us about this if it's not significant? Now, I have a lot of questions about the cocaine in Boca Raton, but that's another day.
Oh, God. Oh, Jesus. That is disgusting.
This is great storytelling right here. We follow this camera follows the skateboard, and boom, we see the case of plutonium. So now this is really advancing the story because we heard about the news reporter saying that plutonium was stolen. They said plutonium. That case says plutonium. We saw that radioactive symbol on the news. We're seeing it on the box. We know this now as the audience. This is the stolen plutonium that the news report was talking about, and this guy has it. This inventor guy who used to have a lot of money, last name Brown. What could he be doing with plutonium? And all these clocks. It's trying to get you to start thinking about what's going on here. Now, Marty, we see this teenager, obviously a skateboarder, school age because there's his backpack on top of the skateboard, and has some relationship with the guy who is in this garage. Now, knowing that our guy is an inventor, we see Marty turning up all these knobs and flipping the switch that says primary power, primary driver, overdrive. We don't know what's going on though yet. And I think that we're meant to think. I believe that we're meant to believe. I did it again. What is wrong with me today? That he's doing some sort of experiment. Because we have only seen kind of this sciencey side so far. Why would he be doing anything else but an experiment in this lab? But now we're seeing it's a guitar. The world's smallest guitar, too. Now, this, of course, is establishing that Marty plays rock and roll, which comes to be an important thing later in the movie, as you all know. This is also called character development for Marty McFly. Oh!
Whoa. Rock and roll.
An alarm's going off that I guess is the cell phone. I mean, the phone.
Yo.
Marty, is that you?
Hey, Doc.
Okay, now we're knowing names. So Doc now is identified. I really can't talk today. This is crazy. Doc has identified Marty as Marty, and then Marty responds Doc. We now know their names. This is helping establish what? So is it a plot point? No. Is it action? No. Is it a character's goal? No. Is it character development? Maybe. Character motivation? No. I mean, there's not a lot in that so far. Let's see.
Where are you?
Thank God I found you. Listen, can you meet me at Twin Pines Mall tonight at 1:15? I've made a major breakthrough and I'll need your assistance.
Wait a minute. 1:15 in the morning?
Yeah.
Doc, what's going on? Where you been all week?
Working.
Where's Einstein? Is he with you?
Yeah, he's right here.
You know, Doc, you left your equipment on all week.
My equipment. That reminds me, Marty. You better not hook up to the amplifier. There's a slight possibility of overload.
Yeah. I'll keep that in mind.
Good. I'll see you tonight. Don't forget now, 1:15 a.m., Twin Pines Mall.
This is exposition.
Are those my clocks I hear?
Yeah. It's 8 o'clock.
Perfect. My experiment worked. They're all exactly 25 minutes slow.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that it's 8:25?
Precisely.
Damn. I'm late for school.
And he's off. All right. So what did we learn here? So we actually learn a lot about the movie in these 5 minutes. We got essential elements of a plot point, even action to advance the plot by Doc saying that, hey, I have a breakthrough in my experiment. I need you to meet me at the mall. So boom, we have 2 essential elements. We even have action to increase the tension, I guess, by Marty being late. I don't know. This is just me thinking about this as we're watching it. Scene should also reveal at least 2 of these important elements. So we got character development. We got character motivation, maybe. Reinforcement of the stakes, how stakes are raised. I guess, yeah, stakes are raised. Stakes are raised by, we know that, Doc has stolen the plutonium, but we definitely got character development and character motivation, yes, from Doc more than Marty. We know that Doc's an inventor. We know that he has a major breakthrough. That's more development, though. Scenes can also reveal these bonus elements. We got character backstory, definitely got world building, got tone and mood. It's going to be kind of fun and kind of light and foreshadowing. A lot of bonus elements. Plot point, character goal. We got some action. So I definitely think as far as this checklist goes, we got a lot from it. We got a lot about the movie. We know who Doc is now. We know about his backstory. We can figure out he's an inventor. We know he stole plutonium. Or at least he has plutonium that was stolen. We don't know that he stole it, but we know it was not a clerical error. We know he's got a dog named Einstein. We know he's been missing for a week. We know that he has an experiment where all the clocks are off. We know Marty likes rock and roll. We know that he's, I guess, not risk adverse, but kind of the opposite, which is interesting. And the reason I say this is because he puts everything up on hyperdrive, or maybe he's just not, maybe that's not him taking risks. It's him showing that he, might not think things through all the way, maybe a little reckless. Perhaps. I like that he's not, you know what? I like that he's not thinking things through all the way. That's the ticket. Who am I? That's the ticket. Who is that again? It's freaking, you know who I'm talking about. What's his name? John Lovitz. That's the ticket. Because what I'm saying is he doesn't think things through all the way. Like when you just find out that this machine, if it goes to 88 miles per hour, you're going to go into the through time, and he goes 90 anyway. Not thinking things through clearly. Obviously, by turning everything to overdrive. Is that what we're getting? I think so. So there are a lot of things that were told here. We also have the foreshadowing of the clock moment. A lot of great storytelling within 5 minutes of a film that can set things up so well. I just wanted to start with this because I want to invite guests and screenwriters on this season of Back to the Future, the podcast, season 10, to really look at all of these elements of a scene and storytelling and breaking things down and why they're important, and what makes them important, and why this dialogue is so great. But guys, I think this is where we put a bow in it for this podcast. I want to take a time out, and we're going to come back next week with a great episode. We're going to break down 10 questions that we have, and then I have some great interviews lined up. As always on the show, we're going to hear from people who are admirers of Back to the Future as well, and so much more on season 10 of Back to the Future, the podcast. But that's all for right now. Until next time, I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore. This is Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time space film trilogy of all time, and I will see you in the future.